Very warm welcome. Very warm welcome to everybody online and in the room. As Auroi said, this is the second meeting of that sort we're doing, very widely open. The first one was in January, and looking at the attendance and registration for that meeting, it seems, and the answers we got to the preliminary question, it seems this is the right thing to do because there is a growing attendance and very interesting comments and questions. The reason we're doing this, and Auroi said it, is that we figured in the SESEC steering committee when the SESEC V project was started that contrarily to what happened since the beginning of the SESEC exercise, which is something like 10, 12, 15 years ago, the context has changed so much that we need to ensure that we're, how can I say, continue to be stakeholders driven, take into account the global context and the very new scenarios that are being designed. We all know that the years and the days of happy globalization are behind us, even if it's usually a cycle. And so we want to make sure that we're doing the right thing. I also take that from the questions we received and the comments we received, there is a lot of expectations on this project, and we're very happy with this. It goes from information flow. We need to have information flow. We need to have a lot of information coming on the normative framework, the regulatory compliance. How does this work? CCC, can we have in-house CCC and all these kind of things, to much wider quests, including saying how can the SESEC can help fragmentation, which it would be great if it could. And we certainly try and contribute to this with this project, but it's a very wide thing. So for today, the thing is quite straightforward. I think you have it on. I cannot see the screen, Auroi. I can just see the how can I say, the front slide, navigating uncertainty. But the program is quite straightforward. Betty will be presenting the latest development in the China standardization ecosystems, actually, new strategy, new areas, voila. Thank you very much. Then we would like to reserve as much as possible time for questions and answers. It's not supposed to be a lecture we're delivering, but it's supposed to be a very interactive meeting. I would encourage you to ask as many questions as you can online during the Q&A, etc., etc. And then the floor will be even more open, if I may say, with the discussion on the challenges and opportunities. We will also go through let's say the series of questions and comments that were asked. And we will start at the very end to try and how can I say, sketch the priority. We have, of course, with this program, priorities, be they technical or policy priorities, but your input will serve to sketch the updated priorities as per the request of the stakeholders, as per the comments of the stakeholders, or the wishes or the knowledge of the stakeholders for that matter. So we're really looking forward to this meeting. I'm not going to take more time than this. I really look forward to this discussion. Thank you again for being here, and let's roll. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Margot. Betty, maybe it's good that people see your face. Wait.
Good morning, everybody. It is very nice to meet you finally in person. Most of them, unfortunately, today is online, but I haven't been in Europe for 4 years, so it's very, very happy to see most of the people in 3D, as Auroi said. So today it is my honor to make some introduction and on China standardization system and China standardization strategy, and I hope my presentation can trigger more interesting discussions to see to see what SESEC will be and how can SESEC project better service serve the European stakeholders. So I'll jump to the presentation for today. Okay, first, just a very simple, quick introduction about SESEC, Seconded European Standardization Expert in China. The project is funded by 5 European standardization related partners. First is European Commission and European EFTA Secretariat, 3 European standardization organizations, CEN, CENELEC, and ETSI. I don't go to details because I just assume everybody knows SESEC project, and that is why you register for this event. SESEC project is a visibility project in both in Europe and in China. We try to increase promote European and international standards in China, improve the context between the project partners and different levels of the Chinese administrations, industry, and standardization bodies. We enhance the visibility and understanding of the European standardization systems in China, gathering regulatory and intelligent standardization and standardization information, and undertake technical lobby if it is necessary. And our goal is to try to set up the cooperation with China in the standardization area where it is possible, and also to support the cooperation framework cooperation agreement in place between the European standardization organizations and SEC. And the project actually started from 2006, and it is, as we discussed, entering the 5th phase. And our project is managed by CEN, supported by steering committees involving with 5 all the partners, CEN, CENELEC, ETSI, Commission, and EFTA Secretariat. And we just launched in October 2022, and we will last another 3 years until 2025. So I'll go just roughly about SESEC project. If you have more questions, you can easily contact us by any partners in the steering committee or directly to me. Now I will discuss or make some introduction about China standardization systems. First, in China, after the recent standardization reform in 2017, China standardization law was published implemented on 1st of January 2018. After the reform, China now have 5 levels of standards, and they are national standards, sector standards, local standards, association standards, and enterprise standards. So we can see we have very complicated systems in China. First, in the national standards, the right column, it also shows the weight or importance of the standards. No doubt, mandatory national standards is the most important standards category in this system because it also regarded as a technical regulation in China. And in national standards, there are also recommended national standards. It is just voluntary standards, and they are all belong to national standards. Less important is sector standards. Sector standards are made by different ministries, different sectors. Then we also have the local standards, which are made by different provinces or big cities, or even some small cities can have the rights to make local standards. For example, Shanghai, car emission standards, Beijing elderly care standards. Most of them are local standards or requirements. Then in 2018, China introduced association standards, which they call market-driven on the right-hand column. Association standards are the federation, industry association, or some other organizations that are legally registered in China as an association to make standards. So consortia standards, we do not have consortia standards in the standardization law, but we regard it, it is not in the official system, but it is de facto exists. And Chinese standardization communities regarded consortia standards as a combination of the enterprise standards. Enterprise standards is made directly, simply, purely by the company themselves and used for themselves. But still, China government or Chinese standardization system try to manage or work or deal with enterprise standards. That's why the company standards are also regarded one of the category of the standards in China system. And in this system, again, national mandatory standards is the exclusively mandatory standards, technical regulation. Before the standardization law reform, some sector standards were also compulsory, but it was changed. It was changed in 2018. So when you talk about mandatory standards, it's still only national standards. And international standards only happens in national standards. So the national committee by ISO IEC, the NC in China is SESEC. So SESEC is in charge with organizing the participation of ISO and IEC and ITU, and also organize the adoption of international standards. Some other global or foreign standards, for example, IEEE or W3C, 3GPP, etc., are joined directly by the companies or by the associations, or sometimes by the major consortia. Sector standards do not have the rights to adopt international standards, local standards, no. Association standards, they also are not relevant to ISO and IEC standards. And I need to remind that in China, most of the time, we were talking about international standards. Basically, it means ISO, IEC, and ITU. And other sort of standards like IEEE, like ASTM, China often says that they are foreign advanced or foreign standards. Even CENELEC, they call that foreign regional standards, EN standards. So this is a detailed discrimination of what kind of standards could be national standards. Usually, the mandatory national standards address technical requirements for protecting of people's safety, health, and also the national and economic environment, and also security. Basically, it's pretty like the European directives or regulations. Voluntary national standards are technical requirements that meet the basic commonly principles or technical specifications. Sector standards in the official documents, China standardization law says, in the absence of voluntary national standards, sector standards may be developed, but it is not the situation. Actually, sector standards are anywhere. So even they have more numbers than national standards in China. Local standards meet special technical requirements such as local natural conditions and local customs. And association standards meet the market, meet the needs of market and innovation. That's China standardization laws wish, that they hope that association standards do not interfere with national standards, with others. They only focus on the market, if market needs some standards where innovation, where international standards, national standards, sector standards are not exist, association standards will take that responsibility, or association standards to encourage innovation. However, it is quite difficult to manage. So sometimes association standards could be different from national standards. And besides the mandatory standards in the standardization law, there are also some sector standards or sectors who can make their mandatory standards, which are environmental protection. So Ministry of Environmental Protection can have their own standards. Engineering constructions, so constructions, civil engineers, they have their own mandatory requirements or standards. Medicine and health, so easily we can see in the medical devices area, the sector standards where are regarded as mandatory standards. And the safety in the production, public security, taxation. So when we talk about public security, it could be mandatory standards anyway. And also military related, like nuclear, aerospace. So it is not managed by SEC, by national standards. They belong to different sectors. Food is still belong to national standards scope. And the legal framework we have in the up level, the standardization law of China. So it will provide the framework of who is doing what in the China standardization, just like our regulation as well, and define the basic elements of China work. And in the second level, secondary regulations in China, the administrative measures for mandatory national standards, voluntary national standards, sector standards, local standards, association standards, and enterprises standards. It also have a detailed measures, for example, the patent in standards, I did not list here, and the patent in standards or how to implement the some other association standards, the best practice of association standards, the evaluation of associations for the standards. And in the sector level, they also have their even not really lower secondary regulations, like MIT will have their own regulation to manage the sector standards in MIT area, and MOT, Ministry of Transportation, also have their regulations in the sector standards of transport sector. So we did some research. There are about 100 to 120 something regulations directly relevant to standards management, about almost 100, and other standard laws regulations may also reference standards. There are also some. And how to number the complicated multi-level China standardization system? Here is the number. So they have national standards numbered as GB number and year. So I just randomly pick the number here, like GB 23784, 2007. It means the GB standards of this number published in 2007. So usually if there is a modification or revision or upgrade of or update of the standards, it will only change the years, like 2023 or 2022. And the GB in China is compulsory standards. GB/T is a mandatory national, it's a voluntary national standards. So GBT 100023 2007 is a voluntary or recommended national standards. They also have a GBZ. GBZ is like the IEC technical report, TR. So this is the guidelines or technical reports. It is sometimes less consensus reached documents published as a standards document, but it is not national standards. Sector standards will have their own first two capitals. and the number and the year. And some of them, most of the sector standards are voluntary, but still, as I mentioned in the previous slides, medical devices can be mandatory as well. So if it's a mandatory sector standards, it is YY without T. /T means recommended. And local standards is DB, like Shandong, like Shanghai, like whatever. So the first 4 capitals are the areas of the local standards, and the number and the year. And enterprises standards, China even ask the enterprises, companies to number their standards. So they give them Q and the number and the year. So this is the 73 sector standards. I only got 67 at this moment. Some of them are really new. For example, machinery, that is number 22, GB. GB standards is a machinery sector standards. And also, for example, the light industry, like the consumer products, lighting or whatever, that is a 37 QB. And for the, for example, number 25, if we just name that, that is finance, GR. And also for the power, electricity power, that is number 9, DL. So see, that's very complicated. The typicals is number 62, YC. So it turned out that there are too many different numbers. So how China is making standards here is just an example for the national standards. So every standards are drafted in the TC level, TCSC working group. So they are technical committee and the virtual management of SEC. So the secretariat is basically located in the institutions, in the state-owned enterprises or the research institutions and the different sectors. For example, the China Electronics Standardization Institute, CESI, their national technical committees are managed by SEC. That is why there's a virtual connection, but they are solidly or physically funded by the ministries. So they have very solid connection with the ministries. They belong to the ministries and they report to the ministries. They are not only making national standards, national technical committees, they are also making sector technical committees and sector standards. So that is why sometimes when SEC says we need to do this and that, if the ministries have different opinions, they will not go strict on their standardization drafting sectors. So, but market-driven is managed nowadays purely by SEC. Also, SEC says it's market-driven, but association standards are registered in the Ministry of Civil Affairs, and they make their association standards and register in the China Standardization Information Platform, and to work on this area. So this is the number about the national professional technical committees, 545, and subcommittees 700 something, and also 277 standardization research institutions in different ministries. And here is the number of currently existing China standards. Mandatory standards, 2,000. National voluntary standards, 43,000. Sector standards, 79,000. And local standards, 67,000. Association standards, 61,000. And enterprises standards, 2 million. And international standards adopted so far, 12,000. So I I think it's easily confused everyone, not only foreign invested companies, but even, believe me, Chinese local companies also face the same problem of what standards can I use, which standards shall I comply. So here is how to identify standards applicable to your products. First, you have to find the horizontal standards like EMC, like product safety, like energy efficiency, like RoHS. And then you found your product A specific standards, product B specific standards. For example, refrigerator, you have to fulfill the EMC, product safety, energy efficiency, RoHS. You also have to fulfill the refrigerator standards. Or like computer, similar, product E could be computer, you still need to fulfill other standards. So this is a very complicated standardization system, but I hope today we just gave a simple introduction on that. Now we go to China standardization strategy because in October 2021, China is the first country published the national standardization strategy, and followed in 2022, European published European standardization strategy, and then US also published their national standardization strategy. So everybody says China triggered this competition. So let's see what they said in their standardization strategy. So first, the China standardization strategy is not called as a standardization strategy. It is called the outline for the development of national standardization. So it is basically called itself as an outline. It is promoting the standardization to serve economic and social development and standardization reform. It wants to strengthening the international exchanges and cooperations on standardization. And the document is published by State Council plus the Central Committee of Communist Party. So in China, it is with political importance. And it is the guidance of mid and long-term development of standardization in China. So it set up the target of 2025 and 2035. It has 35 sectors, sections, 9 chapters, set up 5 main directions, 7 projects, 5 actions, 15 programs, and 19 systems. So 19 different systems. So it is a very huge, comprehensive outline or strategy to give the direction on how standards can serve the Chinese policy, government policy, and Chinese economic and social requirements. So this is how they outline. So China believes that the standardization in the first level, there's laws and regulations which set up the Chinese industry policies, fulfill the policies. And then the second level is the mandatory standards to fulfill the Chinese industry policy, for example, upgrading or this and that. And they also regard it as a regulatory specifications. And the lower level is voluntary standards. Voluntary standards is guiding specifications to make, for example, the law make the must do and must not do, and second is guaranteeing the system to support the policy, and the voluntary standards is to make the how and better for support the governance or China. So standardization has become an important part of the modernization of Chinese governance system. So basically, China make standards ever high as a governance tools. It's not purely industry specifications, technical specifications. China make it with more political importance, or use it as a tool to support the political or industry policy. And with all the China standardization strategy outline and also the other supporting documents, we can make a summary about what is the Chinese strategic approach to standardization. First, we have to keep in mind, although China calls themselves market-driven or market economy, China is still a heavily government-controlled system. After the pandemic, the government control is even severe compared to 4 or 5 years ago. So standardization is the same. China standardization is still heavily controlled by government. Also, government says we have introduced the government-driven, industry market-driven. That is only their wish, but they. Even for the market-driven association standards, the SEC or the government can't help to guide there, to give them guidance, to give them the management, to give them regulations, to give a lot of even subsidies on supporting or encourage there. So if it's market-driven, it could be purely private, no government interfere at all. But in China, it is not the case. Second, that's the second market-driven, but from my personal interpretation, it is not purely market-driven. It's still managed by the government. And other standardization strategic approach, for example, China want to use the standards to enforce the product quality improvement. Compared to European standardization or European regulation, we only focus on essential requirements, purely human health, safety, and environment. In China, often they hope that the products has high quality, can have better performance, can use longer, can have a competitive advantages compared European or other companies' products. That's why sometimes the standards would make a lot of quality-related parameters of performance in their standards. Often you will see that the performance assessment of rice cooker, the standards, rice cooker not only be safe, not only be can do the work, they should have more quality or more can use longer or whatever. So standards deviated from the European concept. Second is Chinese want to use standards to boost indigenous innovation. So often, especially in the China-US trade wars or the current geopolitical situations, self-owned IPR or indigenous innovation is of great importance for Chinese government. So they also often think how standards can support the indigenous innovation. So sometimes they could say that put patents, self IPR patents into standards. So in this scenario, Chinese government sitting in the patent holders position because the patent holder is a Chinese company. Anyway, the third is standards to support regulations and certifications. This is a good thing because China want to learn from our new approach and new legislation framework to set up the one product standards or regulation and then to reference others, but they still have very long road to go because this is not SEC to make such decision. The ministries have to get involved as well. Third is standards go global. We often see that Chinese want to export the standards to Belt and Road Initiative or go to international to support China standards into international standards or supporting the BII initiative. So often if you are the standardizer experts in ISO and IEC, you often see many Chinese experts want to make Chinese standards as a national, international standards. And also with the China Standards 2035 and China National Standardization Strategy or strategy outline, more actions and a full set of governance are made by standards. So that is all from my side. I hope that the simple introduction can trigger more interesting discussions. So just to wonder, before our open discussion, just wonder, do you have any questions? So for the presentation? Thank you.
Thank you, Betty. Wow, very good timing. I think we are even 3 minutes ahead of schedule. That's fantastic. We have more time for questions and answers. For participants who joined later, a little reminder that please, when you put your questions, put your name on the organization, followed by questions and comments. And we will give priority to online participants. And sorry, participants in the room, we have to wait a little bit. I hope you will be okay with that. And then, well, we have one question actually, and already in the chat. Apologies, Bernd. If I may abuse my position as the moderator, I have one question for Betty first, and I would like Betty, do you mind going back to the slide about the number of standards and the different types? Yes, here I do have a burning question. So that is that, do you see that the amount of standards is overwhelming? I think in the CENELEC catalog, we have around 24,300 in total European standards. Now, do you think that is it a problem that there are so many standards? I mean, for European or foreign enterprises?
Thank you, Zhuohua, for the first very burning questions. Actually, yes, they are very complicated system. Believe me, not only foreign invest companies, even the Chinese local companies sometimes feel difficult to find the applicable standards. Often not the industry say that association standards being used all in the sudden by a certification, or a sector standards we may not be aware in the previous time, at least during their drafting stage. It published, and after 6 months it has been used in certain certification or areas. So I believe SEC is trying to solve such problem, but the situation is that there's basically too many standards, too many different SDOs are making standards. It is not easy to navigate to find out. For example, I have a product. Do I need to fulfill just simply national standards or association standards? But the best practice is in China, national standards first. If you can fulfill the national standards, it's better to fulfill the national standard. Just as what I listed in the very beginning, with the weight of different standards. The first one, mandatory standards, then voluntary national standards. If there's other choices or whatever, then you can think about association standards or sector standards. Again, it is very problematic to find the proper standards. Sometimes the industry do not bother to go deeper to some other standards. They just check the national standards and check the voluntary standards and do so. But still, if association standards being used with certifications, I strongly recommend to check mandatory standards, national standards, and relevant certifications. Sometimes government procurements to see what standards are they use. Thank you.
Thank you, Betty. I see now we have questions coming in. Do you think else can we give the floor to people asking the questions?
Can you see that again?
Right. Can you hear me? Maybe people haven't heard me. Sorry. Thank you, Betty, for the comprehensive answer. I see that questions are coming in online. Else, do you mind giving the floor to our participants in the order? And as mentioned before, please identify yourself, your organization, and then your question. Thank you. Bernd, you're unmuted. Would you like to take the floor?
Am I invited to speak?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
Okay, so that was a surprise for me. Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Maybe I'm a little bit beside the main topic, but in general, I have dealt with an IEC work group for developing a standard about intercommunication systems. And nearly at the end of the common work group, which in general was a very good cooperation, I have discovered that in parallel, the Chinese delegation has developed the same standard as a national standard, but with partly higher requirements. A request about at IEC, how could that happen, was the result that IEC standards are for every member only a recommendation. They are not mandatory. But according to the Frankfurt Agreement, IEC standards are becoming EU standards, EN standards, and by this, they are mandatory for all EU members. So it seems to be a little bit unfair. How could that be solved?
Thank you, Bernd, for your question. Actually, this is a very good question. It's not a beside question. It's okay. Because I have to tell you that in China, sometimes the mirror committee of ISO and IEC, they only send several experts to the ISO and IEC. However, they do not discuss the international standard or do not much discuss international standards in their mirror committee at all. Their national committee, they have their own pace or steps on making national standards. For example, 2 years ago, they got the similar national standards project proposal approved. They used 2 years to make a standards. However, the group of people may not be the whole group of ISO and IEC. So 3 experts sending to ISO and IEC cooperate with you, making making IEC TC. I can't remember TC11 standards, but the other lefting standards still sitting together to making a national standards, which are not sometimes not relevant, or sometimes, as you said, the perfect case with different requirements with ISO and IEC standards. This is very problematic because look, if we as the European members cooperate, agreed your requirements in ISO and IEC level, make a compromise, and then turned out you don't even use that ISO and IEC standards, you made your own national standards, it's waste of everybody's time, and also it is really unfair. But the situation at the current situation is that only European CENELEC signed the agreement with ISO and IEC to parallel make standards or compulsory directly adopt ISO and IEC standards to EN standards. Other countries like China, like Japan, like US, they are only national committee or members of ISO IEC, and they follow the member rules. That is that they can voluntarily adopt the ISO and IEC standards. It is not mandatory, but still I believe that we should encourage China SEC to set up a scheme that if you join ISO and IEC, if you make your comments, you make your suggestions, you make other people compromise or agree with your suggestions, you should follow that standards. So we in CENELEC and in the community are encouraging SEC to set up similar rules to see that if you join the ISO and IEC, it's better to adopt ISO and IEC standards. I hope my answer satisfy you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I have discovered by your explanation that it would be better to think in the beginning of starting a development of a new standard to maybe ask about, is it really okay to make a parallel voting with the EU, or let it be as an IEC standard only, to decide afterwards about a version of the EU. Maybe this could be a way.
Exactly. We in my position and in the European standardization community are trying to set up to encourage SEC to set up such scheme.
Okay, thank you.
I see that we have Frank and Gerard and Reinhard. The three questions are sort of a follow-up to my first question about the number of different types of standards and access to them. I think they're, yeah. Well, so maybe Betty, I'm sorry, Frank and Gerard and Reinhard, maybe I can invite Betty to answer your three questions in a row, because they're all related. Apologies for, but if you want to speak, please raise your hand. If it's okay, I will let Betty answer your three questions.
Thank you, Zhuohua. And Frank, I saw your question. Does China actually have a searchable database to search all these standards? Actually, China set up a national standardization information platform. They make the national standards, compulsory national standards and national standards online, and some of them are free of charge for reading. But sector standards, local standards, association standards, they do not have a complete data so far. Although in the China Standardization Strategy Outline, SAC asked the ministries to deposit their standards, register their standards to SAC. It is not fully implemented yet. So my answer is they do not have the complete database for all the standards number I listed in my form. Second is is there any information about de facto use of standards in China? No, it is very difficult. I believe it is not only for China. I think it's also for EU. It is sometimes quite difficult to say. We published in Europe 20,000 standards. How many are used? This is I believe it's quite difficult, and in China it's even more difficult because first, standards is free of charge. You can read. Nobody knows which standards you are using. Second, China asks the industries to self-declare the standards they use, but they do not have a statistic number on that. The database are simply too huge if you collect all the standards used by different industries. So there's no such number available, and I doubt whether China, at least SAC, has such capability of collecting all the de facto used standards in the market. The third question is, yeah,
there's one before.
There's one before, sorry. Would it be possible to get access to a list of standards managed by a ministry for a particular market, such as automotive? Yes, it could be possible. Every year, the MIT will publish a annual book of automotive standardization. They will give the bibliographic data and give some interpretations of certain standards, but only after 1 year you can get a hard copy. They do not. Some of the sectors, like ICT, telecommunication, they have their website, they have the electronic versions ready. Automotives, I still doubt whether they have such soft version. Usually me as an expert, we buy the book every year. They have a machinery standards combination. They have more automotive standardization combination. The book usually they have 3 books per year. But different industries are very varying on collecting their information. I hope the 3 questions the 3 are satisfactorily answered.
Excuse me, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm the one who had asked the last question, Reinhard Weissing, University of Geneva in Switzerland.
Yeah.
If you look at the standardization law of China, it defines standardization as a process of developing standards, but then also implementing and monitoring the implementation of standards.
Yes.
So this is a very interesting aspect. Basically, the downstream side of standardization is part of the definition of standardization. Based on that, you would actually assume that certain activities are taken in order to determine, are the standards actually being used? And when you talk about a standardization as an element of the governance of, in China, modernization of governance, as you have expressed it, you would also expect that there is an attempt to understand which effects do the standards actually have. And that leads to the question, to which extent are they used? What are user experiences and so on? From the SAC website, I know that there's feedback possibility. So you can give feedback on the use of standards, your experience, but this is only, I would say, highly sketchy. Whereas, let's say, for example, are you aware of any, let's say, studies by organizations like CNIS, whose job it is to do research on all types of aspects of standardization, whether they have on maybe certain fields or maybe more horizontally some information, or other organizations, not limited to CNIS, on what effect do actually the standards have? Are they developed in the correct way? In particular, also with considering the top-down system in China. If you have a group of experts and they develop something, impose it on the market, I mean, obviously that there are possibilities for problems, that the standards don't meet user requirements and application requirements. So to address that question, this issue of usability of the standards and de facto use, is there nothing? Thank you.
My personal feeling is SAC wish to do some assessment, and they also ask CENELEC on how to evaluate the standards implementation. Similar question, but they entrust certain think tanks or CNIS, National Standardization Research Institute, to do some work. But so far, my information is that I did not see any mature, solid documents or materials to tackle these questions. Even if in, for example, one particular sector like toys, like you can choose one or whatever, but I didn't see anything. My analysis is basically it is too difficult. First, the think tank, even if they are fully funded by the government, or it need a lot of efforts to connect the standards. Second, the standards in China is free of charge, so you don't know how many standards were sold to anyone, and the only channel I can imagine is to ask the industries to do self-declaration to see what standards they use. But most of the time, the industry will say that I use enterprise standards, which are combination of GB standards, ABC, sector standards, blah, blah, and association standards. I combine all the standards together and choose the useful parameters and make my own enterprise standards, it is even more difficult for the organizations like think tanks or SEC to collect which standards are implemented totally. But I will continue to search to see who are doing such kind of things and whether it will have really useful results for the governance or for the industry. Thank you.
Well, now we have Anton. Else, do you think we can give the floor to Anton? And Anton has a question about certification. Oh, he left. Right. But I think his question is still valid. Let me see. I know, indeed, he's not there anymore. Has left. So Betty, what's your experience on the level of acceptance of European testing results based on European standards performed in Europe for Chinese national certification, requiring using mirroring Chinese standards as the basis for certification? Wait.
My personal experience is that it is quite difficult to get mutual recognition by the different certifications in different countries. Although IEC set up the NB scheme or CB, the CB scheme, some of the testing reports could be recognized, accepted by Chinese certification organizations, but some of the times, because of the sometimes it is even because of the financial reason, they still hope the industries to do the testing again. Others, if the European standards is join the CB scheme, it could be accepted. If it is not CB, it is no chance to be accepted by the certification body at all. Because usually the certification bodies have their testing labs as well. They hope that they can do the test again. So this is my personal feeling, and the situation is changing, but not much. Sometimes the industry will not bother they have to do the test again according to Chinese standards.
The next one is Bernd. Elf, thank you.
May I use my microphone again?
Yes, you can. Yes, we hear you well.
Okay. Yeah, in addition to my first question, in IEC TC 79, there are 3 work groups with strong influence from China. It is for access control systems, CCTV, and intercommunication. And all these technologies, except others, are very, very important for critical infrastructure protection. Critical infrastructure is more and more relevant for, especially in Germany, where I'm located, but I think completely in the EU, according to the development worldwide in the last 3 or 4 years. So the question is, what do you think about it? Could it be a risk that because the China's delegation is most in the work groups have the personal dominance compared with the members of the EU, and that has something to do that maybe the population in China is much more than the EU, and so that's one reason. But the other hand, all the members in from the EU, they are more or less focused on marketing aspects, joining such work groups, while the Chinese seems to be not only have a combination as a rule to work in that work groups. One is maybe ideas from the government to achieve, and economically ones from the companies which are there. What do you think about this topic?
Bernd, I have to admit you ask very sensitive questions here.
Yeah.
Actually, in China, the critical infrastructure security is a very important work for the governance. It is purely from the political or the policy level rather than industry driven. That is why the European experts are more focused on industry, on market, on commercial use, and the experts from China, they all from the cybersecurity, critical infrastructure sort of thing. I can only say that some of the standards are not purely driven by commercial. It is not really purely market driven. There's a lot of quality, a lot of critical infrastructure or national security or cybersecurity reasons behind.
Yeah.
So that is why you can see, yeah, it is quite different from the methodology are quite different from between China and EU.
Mm. Would that mean that it would make sense to put more focus on it in such work groups with critical technologies to decoupling international standards in European ones and Chinese ones?
It's really complicated. If we can get a common consensus in the international level by each make compromise, it could still be possible to get the international standards harmonized or finally be adopted by China. Otherwise, I don't know whether China will adopt the European industry purely or commercial purely standards in this area. Because in China, you have to see the standards. This is not only not only standards. There are critical infrastructure management rule in the ARP. They set up some mandatory requirements already in the regulation. The standards can only fulfill that can be used in China. Otherwise, even if the European standards are commercially driven or IEC standards, if it do not fulfill the requirements of the Chinese laws or regulations, it cannot be used by China.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I see that we have a lot of questions coming, which is a very good thing. Let me say that I still would like to give the audience the chance to ask questions. Maybe now, I would like to check in the room if we have any questions in the room. Okay, no, then we address, let me see, the questions now on the screen that we can see until Michael, okay? And then we move on to the next agenda item. Right. Reinhard, we're going to invite you to introduce your question. Thank you.
Yes, I mean, I cannot say much more what I wrote, but one sees in China, they're increasingly standards addressing, let's say, carbon issues, and there's the commitment by the Chinese government to have reached peak carbon before 2030. There are increasing standards and also some certification schemes on green products or green product design and so on, and low carbon issues. But I'm not very familiar with that side of, let's say, the quality infrastructure. Can you say something about how do you judge the development of that area? So green certification, low carbon certification. Thank you.
Anna recently studied some green and low carbon certification only in recent years. Actually follow the the big pressure or from Europe because European had done a lot of Green Deal requirements in the regulation. In China, although there are many green, recently, I remember in 2016, they studied the green product certification, and recently there are some voluntary low carbon certification, but they are not mandatory. And most of the Chinese companies do not want to, or basically cannot fulfill such requirements. It is simply because of the cost. If they fulfill the green product certification or low carbon requirements, it means a big incremental of the cost and also the big incremental of the price. And also it will reduce the competitiveness if other companies did not do that. And Chinese customers do not have the purely concept of buying the environmental friendly products at this moment. They are still price sensitive. They focus on the low price rather than better environmental protection schemes. That is why only if the government decided to make it compulsory, it is possible to have wide use of green certification or low carbon certification. Otherwise, it's purely the high tier companies who use that to make exportation to Europe or to US. They can force themselves to do the green or low carbon certification or make or reach that requirements. Otherwise, I think it is very difficult in China to implement such scheme. Thank you.
Could I just add some just to this question? You know that in the European Commission, there's the plan to introduce a carbon adjustment tax. So yes, if you export or import into the European community, you would have, if you don't meet certain requirements in terms of low carbon, you would have to pay additional money that would raise the price of your products, would make them less competitive. Is that something which and on the other hand, yeah, please.
Sorry, that is one of the pressure China received from the European, the carbon border adjustment scheme. Sorry.
Yeah.
Others are like a battery regulation, digital the product passports, carbon front life cycle recycling, a lot of things. Chinese industry don't even think about it before. They don't want to fulfill that, only if they want to exporting that to Europe. In China, government do not ask them to stop making high, non-green products. They will still do so because simply the price is lower than the green products. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, we are 10 minutes behind schedule. I think as indicated, I see that we have received more questions, but I want to insist that we stop at Michael and Islamian. And Betty, can you please make sure that your answers are a bit shorter? Thank you. Yeah. Jari Vario, you have 2 questions. Could you now you can take the floor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Good. So my first was related to earlier one case where the China has followed the international standards and then made this kind of local variation for that international standard. My question relates that whether we have collected this kind of evidence, how widely this is happening, and if I assume that we have not collected that, would that be a good idea to have such reporting system established where we could European industry report when we observe this kind of behavior, and then we could have a better understanding how wide and systematic is this kind of behavior. And the second one, a little bit following this one, is that whether you do any collaboration with the Japanese or USA-based similar organization who are following Chinese standardization activities. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry, for your question. First, for the modification, we can spare some resources on follow up the modification of ISO and IECs in China. But sometimes we feel we have very limited resources, and it's just too many, 10,000 to something, and with modification. So our team cannot do that. I know it can be done, but it needs more resources and more time on. Once Chinese publish one, you make analysis and report to Europe. It is, yeah, it can be done, but it is resources related. And second, I'm work very closely with Japanese. We have a collaboration with Japanese embassy and some US standardization bodies on following up or collecting standardization informations in China. Thank you.
I would like to add to what Betty has said about monitoring. I think it's not that difficult to monitor the data. So we have more or less, we know more or less how many ISO IEC standards have been adopted in China, and in varying degrees of identical adoption with modification. I think that, Betty, that's not very difficult. We don't have to follow one by one, but we can. It's easy to gather that data. So we have. It's good. And then on the second one about collaborate with other countries and regions regarding, I think whenever we have a concern and we share this concern with some other countries, we always try to collaborate either through the European Union and the Commission services, or and even sometimes we also have common concerns with China. So this kind of coordination is fluid. Michael from Huawei France.
Hello, thank you very much. Do you hear me okay?
Yes, very well.
Okay, very good. Seemed I was muted in the beginning. All right, thanks for the floor. My question is slightly different, and it's not about the details of the Chinese standardization system, but it is more about collaboration on standard between Europe and China. And I see SESEC and one of its main aims to be maintaining or improving the dialogue and the level of collaboration between the two. And I think in these days of geopolitical tensions and the standardization strategy of China on one hand, and the European standardization strategy on another hand, and digital sovereignty ideas and so forth, I think it's even more important to maintain this collaboration and dialogue to avoid further fragmentation and decoupling when it comes to global standards. So I wanted to know what SESEC in concrete does, or if there are any activities ongoing at the moment to try to improve this. And the second question I have is also related to that, is related to the Indico project, which had the same aim, and now it seems to continue in a new shape or form as a Horizon project moving on into the next year. And as it has a Chinese element, I was wondering if SESEC is or will be involved in that, and if there's any update or progress about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for your very good question. Yes, it is true. I still think that even under this challenging geopolitical situation, China and EU still need to cooperate, and there are many chances or opportunities for China and EU to cooperate in the field of standardization, because standardization is a win-win and is a common language of international trade and of products. And maybe there could be even more challenging for the in the IT and ICT scenarios. But I believe that we from EU and China still need to talk and need to make more understanding of each other, and then set up the cooperation where it is possible. This, according to these perspectives, SESEC projects currently support the, for example, the understanding of European standardizations for the Chinese side. So we closely work with SAC, SMRR, and CENELEC, different organizations, to try to explain how it's doing in Europe, like the carbon reduction or battery regulation, digital passport. We also try to support or coordinate the bilateral dialogues between China and EU. For example, the CENELEC and SAC just had bilateral task force China meetings, and also bilateral meetings in Qingdao International Cooperation Forum. A lot of things are going on, and we try to make European stakeholders to understand the Chinese situation, and coordinate dialogue, set up cooperation where it is possible. For the second question of Indico, I leave this to our project manager, Zhuo Hua, to make a formal answer. Thank you.
I see that Margot would like to answer the question on Indico. Before that, also, I would like to add a little bit what Betty had said about dialogue. SESEC is main task is to establish dialogue and based on good information. I think that's the main purpose from me as a project manager perspective. And I think both the European stakeholders and I think even as also for our Chinese colleagues, SAC sees the value of SESEC, and they have expressed explicitly that SESEC is a very valuable project for them too. I think there's no misunderstanding that this project is aimed for cooperation whenever that is possible. Yeah, and on Indico, yes, indeed, there's a new project, and Indico Global. There is a SESEC, if there is a China element, we definitely will ensure synergies between the projects. CENELEC is involved in together with ETSI, so the steering committee members actually are partly overlapped. So definitely we will synchronize our activities, but it's not yet kicked off. It will start in next year. So we will see how in terms of content, how we coordinate. Thank you. And Margot.
Thank you. So I know you said basically what I wanted to say. I think it's two different games, even though some of the objectives are consistent and the objectives are consistent. But I think we should not mix, and also Indico is 2 is not really started. So voila. But you answered Michael Islamian's question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you everybody for this very lively discussion. I'm very happy. Apologies for the further questions. We will keep your questions here. If we have time, we may come back. But we need to move on to the next agenda point, which is our discussion on what are the challenges actually. So Betty, can we move to the...
But Mr. Yari Vario's question is actually a good introduction for the next agenda item.
Let me see. Sorry, I haven't read it.
Is it really possible to create collaboration between international and China standardization? Because in China, the standardization is a completely different strategic purpose as expressed in the presentation. I think this is a quite interesting question to start the debate.
Absolutely. What do our participants think about that? No? Maybe we need a bit more time to think about this?
Maybe Betty can
Betty, do you have some initial thinking to as a food for thought?
If you ask me, I think the current challenges is first, no doubt, the geopolitical tensions. Sometimes, if you ask me several years ago, standards is purely industry work. Engineers are making their decisions, and but nowadays, as the situation changes, sometimes we see a lot of political influences in this process. So I don't go more, but this is obviously one challenge. The second challenge is the climate change standardization activities. For the climate change, there are different opinions, or sometimes, although people believe this is quite important issue, but in China and the EU, how to tackle that, whether the actions of European side on low carbon or carbon border tax adjustment, since it's to tackle the climate change issues, but it could be interpreted in China as the technical barrier sort of process. How to align that and how to make standards cooperate in this area is also another challenge. And how to work to have common agreements on things like carbon footprint, like the green energy. It's just simply a little bit difficult to do cooperation. This is the two I can think of at this moment.
Right. Now, Betty, I give a bit more. Right, I give a bit more time for participants to think. But I do have a follow-up question on that one, which is, do you see the European system, the European and the Chinese standardization systems, as converging or diverging from each other? From your presentation, you have shown that, for example, in the standardization reform, we have seen an introduction of a new type of supposedly market-driven standards, designed by the government, of course, but that is supposed to drive the market. Well, but that as a layer of complexity to the system itself, and that likely creates a parallel system to the international one. However, there is also a positive recently a positive development, which is that SAC has established a route for how association standards can become national standards, and eventually from there to international standards. So that's, in my view, after the creation of association standards, we have made a positive kind of step towards aligning the association standard with the international system. But in general, do you see the European and the Chinese standardization systems as converging or diverging? Thank you.
in the Chinese standardization law reform, SEC introduced market-driven elements, association standards. At that time, there are already analyses that China combined European system together with US standardization system. We both know that in US, ANSI as a accreditation body accredit the SDOs and to see their standards sort of thing. China similarly copied that scheme and trying to use SAC as accreditation body to accredit or to endorse the association which are in good practice. So I see that it's become a bit compared to the before the. Anyway, it's more like a bit divergent from the European system because we in Europe only use ISO IEC standard. We try our best to adopt ISO and IEC standards, and we believe that one standard, one test to accept anywhere is the key of the standardization. However, in practically there are more standards available in China. If you ask me, that's about 20,000, 200,000, 100,000 more standards in China, and the adoption of international standards are not so influential anymore because there are more other standards, more like sector standards, association standards, or even national standards. Only if SEC says that we have national standards, ISO and IEC, and we don't have overlapping or conflicting standards, it will be more similar like that. But obviously, it is not the situation. A lot of association standards are encouraged to make better, higher, stricter requirements than the national standards. If national standards adopt ISO and EC, it could be easily see just as Bern said that China national standards are even higher with higher requirements than the agreed IEC standards. So it is a bit deviation from our current system.
I see that Reynard has raised his hand. Reynard, please go ahead.
Can you hear me? I think I'm muted. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, I mean, I think we simply have to live and accept that there are different systems around the world, and this is just how it is. And but what I believe is important is transparency, comparability. So that means we need to have capture key data in order to see what, let's say, about technical content, about adoption, and so on. Maybe to the association standards. I mean, you can say that is an adoption of the US system or kind of going in the direction of the US system. But you could also say, for example, in many leading European standards bodies, national bodies, but also in CENELEC, as well as in ISO and IEC, you have these so-called, let's say, abbreviated, or in the past it was called new deliverables, let's say publicly available specifications, technical specifications, and so on. And now with this regulation in China to transpose the association standards into national standards, you could also say, obviously the system works differently, but we could look at certain association standards with regard to national standards also as a kind of new, let's say, abbreviated deliverable, which represents a smaller degree of consensus, but we have pathways of transposing those deliverables into national standards, Chinese national standards. And in that sense, there is, to a certain degree, a similarity. But I would say we have to live with different systems and overlaps and coordination and so on, and that's okay. I think I wouldn't get too excited about it. Thank you.
Thanks. We have Bernd. Would you like to take the floor?
Yes, thank you. I'm very happy about this webinar and this conference and the results so far. And of course, everybody has a focus on his daily business, and my focus is more on safety, security. And but you said as an standardization about rice cooking and refrigerators, these are, that makes it clear, is quite different from safety security application and safety security technology. So safety security technology can be taken, can be used to collect personal data. And personal data is becoming more and more important for everyone in the world, and especially for every organization. So I think a strategy for making standards in the future should be divided into two different kinds, minimum two different kinds. Are these standards relevant for using in critical infrastructure, and are they can be used to collect personal data? So if yes, we need to put much more aspects to think about how could we avoid influence from and I don't want to say only China, maybe from that countries who are doing the product, the production, because how can be controlled, that there are no backdoors inside and so on. So at the moment, I think that the standardization strategy is common for everything, but maybe there is a need for a deviation into two different strategies. And such a high critical strategy is not relevant for rice cookers and refrigerators, of course. Is there any possibility to achieve such a deviation in strategies of the European standardization?
I totally agree. I remember in January we have a stakeholder consultation about SESEC reset. We had the discussion that maybe the different sectors may have facing different realities. In some area, it's just easy to make a harmonized standards between China and the EU that the cooperation, and in some other areas, it's just simply not possible because of many reasons. So we will have flexible strategy on coordinating with or cooperate with different sectors to set up different strategy to cooperate in where it is possible. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Bernd. I think Jari, would you like to take the floor?
Can you hear me?
Yes, no.
Good. Sorry, I was on mute. So I wanted to continue my previous comment that for me, it seems that these two systems, international standardization activities and the China standardization activities, they have a completely different goal. So when the international standardization is trying to promote this kind of global market access and to make all the countries equally able to compete in the global market, in China, it seems to go in the different direction. So standardization is used for this kind of like promoting Chinese companies and to make the more difficult for market access to China market by the non-Chinese companies. So for me, this looks like that there is a principle, the world will be divided into two international standardization activities, and then we do have this China standardization activities. And of course, this is not a good way forward, and I don't have any silver bullet over here to offer how we could avoid this, but I think in order to discuss this, I think we have to first recognize what is the basic problem over here. And it's this Chinese like a purpose of using standards to promote the Chinese industry and the companies rather than to promote this global economy. And I think that's the basic rule, and that's what we have to tackle then if we want to try to find a solution to this problem. Thank you.
I totally agree with you. I think that pretty much as a SESEC, as a bridge between EU-China standardization dialogue and cooperation, I pretty much listen to the European stakeholders' wish. In certain areas, we set up cooperation, and in some certain areas, we just to try our best to set up dialogue and have a mutual understanding. So this is our scheme, and thank you, Jara, for your good recommendation.
If I may, I would like to add a bit on what Betty had said. I think that Betty can correct me. My understanding when in 2018 China had the standardization reform was before they introduced the association standards, was that the European and American systems, and I think including the Japanese system, have been extensively studied before they did launch the reform, and they want to take the best of all the systems. And at the time, there was also this intensive discussion about dual circulation. So external circulation linking within the global economy and in domestic circulation, and making the best use of the domestic market. Now, what we have been, at least from CENELEC perspective, we've been trying to tell China, SAC, look, like the principles of Vienna and Frankfurt Agreement actually in your interest, because you do not create separate markets, even for manufacturers, Chinese manufacturers, the compliance cost for domestic regulation and foreign regulation and will be simplified, it will reduce cost. So for businesses, like we say, it's one standard, one test everywhere, that's the best. Yes, of course. And that's the message we've been giving. And we will continue giving this message. But from, I think it's also a process of China. Recently, we see that economic data is not going well, and we see the foreign investment significantly reduced. And I think the Chinese government has its own work and thinking to do. And we see a new round of Chinese government trying to engage and more open with foreign invested companies, and it's a process. I think the message from us is international standardization, global standardization. That's at least that's from us. So Jerry, you have comment?
Yeah, I think that emphasizing this international market for the Chinese companies is important, but however, if this standardization is used so that it's compatible with the China standard, or Chinese products are compatible to the international standards, but the international products are not compatible with the Chinese standards, even they are using the basic communication technology. Let's take that as for example. So if the telecommunication standard is the same, utilized everywhere, but Chinese products are compatible with the international standards, are able to enter in the international market, but then the European companies' products are not compatible with the using same standard, international standard, are not compatible with the Chinese standards, where there are the additional layers of quality requirements, some testing requirements, etc., what is actually not considered as standardable topics in Europe by the international standards. I think this is the basic problem over there, that in China, the standardization is expanded to some areas what are not considered as good to be standardized in the Western world. So that's my takeout over here, and how to solve this problem. As said, that I don't have a silver bullet over here. I'm just seeing that it's going to getting worse before it's getting better. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we agree with that assessment. In we also in constant conversations with the Commission services that the whatever dialogues and agreements we have is based on reciprocity. I think reciprocity is a very important principle. Now we have sorry, before I pass on to Margot, I see Margot's hand is up, Rainer's hand is up. I have Justine in the, I've got your name right? Sorry. I've Justine from ECOS, who have been wanting to speak for a long time. Sorry, Margot, no, Rainer.
Is my microphone working?
Yeah.
It is. Good memory skills on my name and organisation. It's been quite a while since we last met. So I'm Justin Wilkes from ECOS, the Environmental Coalition on Standards. I'm sort of responding to the question that's up there, but it's been hidden by the other questions. And I think my question also fits a little bit with Jari's question that's up there from Nokia, but also builds on Reinhard's points that he's been making. And it refers to the importance of dialogue between Europe and China, as well as other trading and competition partners. If we look at the environment from a horizontal perspective, climate change also means cooperation, but it also means competition from an industrial perspective. That is a reality. It's helpful, it's unhelpful, but it is a reality. And I think dialogue at the standardization level between CENELEC and ETSI and Chinese standardization bodies is absolutely crucial. Dialogue at the political level is absolutely crucial as well. Obviously, dialogue will happen from a trade perspective on critical raw materials, rare earths, and electric vehicles and their components, particularly batteries, as we've seen recently, particularly if the member states support the Commission's recent proposals on electric vehicles. If I look at the eco-design area, so another environmental area, there is a dialogue at the political level, or there was a dialogue at the political level between the Commission and the Chinese authorities. If I look at the WTO TBT agenda, eco-design is quite often there with requests for dialogue from China, but not only from China, from Japan and the US as well. So I guess my question is, from a horizontal perspective, can this project provide that dialogue on environment from a horizontal perspective, covering a large number of areas?
Yes, actually, the green eco design is a very crucial part for the EU-China dialogue or understanding. I've been asked many times by Chinese stakeholders what is carbon, how to calculate carbon float, how to do this and that. I also saw some comments to see like a battery regulation. How can we make sure China and the EU do not have different double efforts on making different regulations? I think there could be some cooperation opportunities here to make sure that the market access requirements are harmonized based on the environmental or carbon or green products level. I hope it can answer part of your question.
Margot, would you like to say something?
Well, very quickly, I think it's a very interesting discussion. It's actually the very reason why we have these meetings. Because the question is, how do we collaborate? Is it, and Yari, various question, is it really possible to create collaboration between international standards, etc.? There is collaboration happening in 3GPP, ISO, IEC, ITU, name it, etc. And it's true the context is changing, which is also why we do these meetings. We have, at least for ETSI, been growing and developing in a world that was like happy globalization, global supply chains, global trade, seamless global trade, and so forth and so on. And we see the geopolitical context changing very much with the regionalization, if I may say, of the different blocks, which is mirrored in standardization. No matter how much we would like to stay immune, we live in this context, etc. So I don't think the plan B is to stop or to separate. I mean, it seems to me, from what I hear from the members, fragmentation is the worst that could happen, and going back to one region, one standard was probably not a good idea. But maybe the issue is that in some areas you do try and collaborate as much as you can, and in some area you move from standards collaboration to standards diplomacy. After all, diplomacy is made to talk to everybody, including the people you may not always agree with. But the plan B is not to stop talking and say, okay, you're different, I'm different, therefore let's move on and our roads are parting. So I think this is what this meeting is for. It's actually quite a very interesting discussion and very helpful. Europe, to a certain extent, is let's say, changing its ways to make sure that standards in support of European legislations are made for Europeans only. This is maybe the beginning of an answer when it comes to government answers. Voilà, but I think standards, sorting out areas where you do collaboration and others where you do diplomacy might be something we could look at in this program. Thank you.
Thank you, Margot. I like what you say, collaboration and diplomacy, differentiate them. And Rainer, you have your hand up.
Yes, okay, you can hear me. Look, I would like to challenge a little bit this picture of happy globalization and happy standardization within the happy globalization. I think it's a question of the perspective. If I remember, maybe 15 years ago, I read an article by a Chinese researcher on standardization, and he made a comment and saying that basically Western countries and big companies in Western countries, they try to use standards to impose their patents, using standards essential patents on the Chinese market. And Chinese, they produce, let's say, DVD readers and so on. They have to, in order to do that, they have to pay license fees to Western companies. And now I think and so I think from a Chinese perspective, this is a subordinate perspective and not a happy perspective. Yes, it's just an example. And therefore, I think that what's happening in China is also an attempt of still catching up and going beyond catching up and leading in certain areas. And I think this is can then also result in Chinese standards in fields that are not covered by international standards. But if we compare this with leading European standards, national standards bodies, or the US, then we have exactly the same thing. They are not just adopting, they are also developing their own standards. They have new deliverables and specifications and all kinds of stuff in order to push into markets and try to capture markets and then push that up into, let's say, regional and maybe international standards. And I think what the Chinese do is, to a certain degree, similar. They may do it maybe sometimes maybe less diplomatic, more provocative, and so on. But the general strategic orientation is the same. And I think we need simply also to understand this, that we are no longer living in a world where we had the US and where we had Europe, and then there was Japan somewhere outside this Western frame, but still within the triangle, basically, yes. And now we have new players coming up, and this changes how the system works, how the people behave, certain rules, and we have to adapt, and we have to be more vigilant and more attentive to what's going on. And whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, that's how it is. And also the question of the adoption, the use of international standards. If you look at the United States, they hardly adopt international standards, okay? And I would also, I did not study this, but I would think that probably what you say about pushing Chinese standards to other markets, yes, a Belt and Road Initiative as a prime example, but you could probably say similar things for pushing of US standards, ASTM, API, and all kinds of stuff into other markets, and using those as de facto international standards. And you could say, is this not also a similar kind of development where US companies, they push their standards? So I think we need to simply say, China is a major power that is increasingly important, and we have to see how they operate, and we have to also simply adapt our expectations of what is normal, so to say. Yeah, and that's it. Thank you.
That's very nice. Thank you.
May
Jerry.
I intervene here?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
we sorry, just one from a moderator. I'm sorry, I'm looking at the time. So we will stop after your remark for this agenda item, and we will do the concluding. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I wanted to just comment the previous speaker that it's a different situation in the Western world where the companies are competing with each others and trying to compete also with the standards with each others. In China, it's a government orchestrated system. It's a systematic approach where they are trying to create this kind of Chinese like standards, where you are referring that USA is coming some standards. Yes, there are coming from standards from US, but I doubt that there are very many of them what the USA government is pushing forward. In the same way, it's not the European Commission what is pushing the standards forward, but it's the organization what are pushing, where there are a very wide acceptance for the Chinese companies also to participate and to be part of this international copper market. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry, and thank you for all the participants who have actively contributed to this exciting discussion. I think, of course, we haven't really had one conclusion. I think we are looking at taking into all your remarks and different perspectives into account, and we have more questions probably than answers. But today our time is limited. We're moving on to the concluding remarks. Sylvia, over to you.
Hello, can you hear me? I have a problem with my camera in general, as we are not really. I'm really sorry I cannot be with you, but I would have, as you can hear from my very deep voice, I have a big cold, so I didn't want to spread my germs today in CENELEC, so I stay home. I think the debate today was incredibly interesting, was very eye-opening, because I think everyone knows that China is a partner that we cannot avoid, whether we like it or not, and that as European Union and as European Commission, our policy is to talk to everyone rather than build walls and and try to close our markets. As Zoa was saying, we had a quite interesting working group on standardization that we have with SAC in the framework of the bigger dialogue between DG GROW and the State Administration for Market Regulation of China. And there as well, we saw that actually that also the Chinese are very aware that they are a big power. They cannot simply avoid the rest of the world. And of course, in the current geopolitical situation, talking to other partners for China is not particularly easy. So we are trying, of course, to mediate that and to try to talk to all the possible partners. I think today we learned that how important the SESEC is and how relevant the project is. So I think that we have some good basis on which to review the working methods of Betty. And I think also that the message that came out is that the current priority sectors is actually quite relevant. They are the ones we should focus on. However, we would like really you to have a look at the SESEC website. It's really very, very full of information and awareness and everything that you may want to know about the Chinese standardization policies. And also, I would like you to contact us, either Sen or Betty or myself, in case you need some further things. For example, tomorrow we will have, on Monday, we will have a meeting of the SESEC together with some commission services. And we have received a couple of very specific answers that I don't think Betty could answer on the spot, but at least it's a little bit of homework for her to take to Beijing when she flies back. So with this, I would like to thank you all for participating. It has been a really, really good session. And sorry for my voice and sorry for not putting the camera on, but my face does not look particularly appealing. So thanks a lot and bye-bye.
Thank you, Sylvia, and thanks to everybody for participating and contributing to very lively discussion. And final remark, I want to say that even though probably your sector doesn't appear on the priority list, anytime when you have a question, please don't hesitate in throwing an email to Betty or myself. Thank you. Okay, we call our meeting adjourned.
Thank you very much.